Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual book launch. I was just saying to Karin that it feels like such a long time ago that we were talking about launching the book, and it's been a kind of labor of love for I think 3 years, and so for it to finally now be out in the world, it's very exciting and also a little bit scary. But it's really nice to see some familiar faces who are here to support us and some new faces. And I'm so happy that you're curious about the book and us. So thank you for being here. I'm Lisa, for those of you who don't know me. I'm one of the authors, and I'm joined by my co-author Karin, of course.
Hi.
So our plan today is to start with a bit of a conversation between Karin and I about why this book, why now, perhaps to share some kind of highlights and stories from the book. And then we want to give you a little bit of time to chat to each other and maybe kind of digest what we've talked about and see what questions you're sitting with, any skepticisms, any takeaways, any thoughts, and then we'll have a kind of Q&A at the end. So we want it to be a little bit interactive as well, so it's not just you kind of watching us, but also you interacting with the ideas in the book. And I'm sure many of you have lots of experiences also to draw on that you can bring to the conversation. So feel free to put things in the chat as we go along. We're quite flexible, so we may kind of pick up things that are happening there in our conversation. But to start with, I thought I'd ask you the question, Karin, of when you asked me to write this book with you, what was for you the purpose of this book? Why did you want to write it? Why did you want to share these stories?
Yeah, I had wanted to share them for a long time myself, and I saw that you had a lot of background knowledge, and also, of course, you're a great writer. So for me, it's important, from the beginning, it was important also to share the practical experience, not theory, because there's so much theory out there and so little practice. How do you do it? How do you do it? And in the beginning, it was both the structures, how do you decide things together, how do you set salaries, but less of that, since this development we've seen the last couple of years was totally astonishing for me. I would never expect that to happen in my lifetime, if I compare to how this subject was regarded like 10 or 15 years ago, with skepticism and questioning and everything. So for me, it became more and more important because I've heard people speak about structure, and I wanted to highlight and contribute the thing I experience is crucial. The working climate. I would never think that you can have self-management work if you don't have a working climate. And the leadership, because I had so much struggle with former managers having a hard time adjusting and change. So those two things were really important to contribute, because I saw the risk of people trying this in structures and reorganize everything structure-wise and then say, oh, it didn't work.
Yeah, I think when we first met in 2016, and I heard you talking about that you had been experimenting with introducing self-management to companies as far back as the 90s, I was so excited, like, wow, someone's been doing this since the 90s. And I was also so interested in the idea that you weren't helping companies transform by introducing structures and processes. But I remember very clearly you saying that really it's about having different kinds of dialogues and a different way of being. And that I hadn't heard before. And that was very compelling to me and became for me like, that's the missing piece. That's kind of a blind spot, I think, for so many people who are exploring new ways of working.
Yeah, and the being occurred already earlier than that, because I started experiment with self-management for real, so to speak, in 1999. And And before that, I worked with so many unemployed people in the big recession in Sweden, 93, 94. And that's where I discovered that my way of relating and being to the people I was supposed to support actually impacted how they were being and taking out their capacity, really. And what I found is that I had to take out every track of hierarchy in the dialogue. And I also saw that the job organizations were totally blind to that. So they tried to sort of be off, in some sort of hierarchical way. And you can't support somebody if you are like that. And that goes for that situations, for managers, for teachers, for doctors, for everyone. So that's where I got something about the being.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that for those of you who haven't seen the book, I should probably have it on like a banner behind me or something, but this is what it looks like. And the stories in this book, I think I remember that we were very keen to oh, that's so nice. That we were really keen to, as you said, to write about it from the perspective of practice, from lived experience, and to bring the human stories to life. And so there are a number of different organizations included in the book, and some we didn't include, but ranging from a hotel to a healthcare company, a training company, a call center. And it was also important to us to share not just successes as well, and sort of say, hey, this model's amazing and it's the truth and the way, but also to share, some of the painful learning moments as well. And I was thinking it might be interesting to share with listeners here what you discovered about the prerequisites for having this way of work. What were the pieces that you realized, okay, it doesn't work without that?
Yeah, as I said, one thing is you have to install or develop a climate that is working, and where people can be safe and speak out. And
if I just jump in there, because it's interesting, like a few people have been asking me about this term climate, because I don't think it's commonly spoken about. So maybe it's helpful to say, like, what do we mean when we say working climate? What is that exactly?
So the working climate is the thing that there, when you're a group of people, the atmosphere, the air, the between people, things that's going on, the ungraspable stuff that is so hard to capture, but that we all suffer from when it's silent, cautious, hostile, or something. Then it's very tangible almost, and very few of us usually do stuff about it. We sort of, maybe we notice it, but on many workplaces, you just let it be. I mean, it's a bit different because we start to talk about it more nowadays as something that should be altered or so. But that's what, and that also comes from the unemployed era, because I met with people who were forced, or they were asked to go to those groups of job-seeking groups, and they didn't want to go there. And by the time I was very young, I was under 30, and I had to go to small cities in Sweden, and I came from Stockholm, and Stockholmers are arrogant, and don't know anything about small cities. So there was so much hostility in the air, and so much reluctance to do what we were supposed to do. And I really got that I can't be doing anything valuable here with this atmosphere. So I started to experiment with how can you change atmosphere without knowing if it was possible. But for some reason, I thought, well, we can talk about it, So I I called those first days with the group, because that's what's everywhere, every time. And I brought everything up so they could say all the stuff that they didn't like about that activity and about me. And I learned what conversations do you have to create something else. And one really crucial thing here is to give people choices to participate. And of course, they didn't think they had a choice, because in this case, if they weren't there, they wouldn't get money from the state. No sort of dole money. So they didn't experience having a choice. So I had to create a way of speaking to them as to address that they didn't think they have a choice. But anyway, I would like you to choose to be here for your sake, sort of. Really complicated, sort of, could you really do that? But it turned out that worked. And that's what we use now in change processes, because change processes, there are no choice. It's like, it comes this directions from above, and you just are supposed to obey. So we train managers to have those conversations about leaving a choice. So there was a lot of experimenting, because I understood that this was so much in the way. And I couldn't imagine then that it has so much to do with business results that is turnout that this has.
And it's fun, of course, now, because there's research coming out now, Amy Edmondson's research about psychological safety. And now I often think of the parallel also of like mindfulness and meditation, where you name things without judgment or trying to change them, but you name them and that transforms something. And so now we know that it is possible to have a very localized climate, which is different to culture. Climate is more local to a team or a group of people, and that it's possible to shift it just by starting to talk about it, and then encouraging people to sort of see that, you know, you have this great phrase of like shifting from seeing ourselves as consumers of our working climate or of our, you know, crap meetings or whatever it might be, towards being co-producers, that just by saying something or asking a question or, you know, pointing to something, I'm suddenly co-actively contributing to changing that. You know, how do we want it to be then, and how do we do that?
Yeah, and all working people on earth seems to want the same things. That's universal. So that's, don't take so much time to distinguish what we want.
I sort of, yeah, Klaus, do you have a question?
So, well, I'm very happy about you talk about the working climate, and I totally agree how much it can change in a setup if you start, you know, talking about the things we should talk about, actually. But and I do it myself in teams. But I'm wondering, what about if we have like an organization with 50 people, or 100 people, or 200 people? Do you start out in teams, or what? How do you kind of attack the problem if it is a larger group of people, maybe an entire organization? Yeah. That's the first question. And then, of course, at some point we come to the problem that all kind of CEOs talk about, especially for large organizations. They say, what about scalability? And I think that's really, well, I would like to have your comments on that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first question, yes, you can do it, but all organizations are organized in teams, more or less. But we have done it in school with 180 people in the dining room of the school, or not dining, lunchroom, I guess. And they were in a terrible state and had been for years. Another example, we haven't done it with more than maybe about 200 yet. But that's just because we didn't have the opportunity or the prerequisites needed, which means a good management that are insightful enough, and you don't meet them so often. But we have done it with an organization now, and we started with the headquarters because it was the worst place, 50 people. And there it took 3 sessions to really shift it. And then they maintained it themselves. Yeah. And then you can do it in the other. So that's not a problem, I would say. The size is, I mean, of course it takes more time, but the crucial thing is the management. And the other question, can you please say?
That was just about scalability when we start to talk about self-governing, self-managing organization and so on. I think a lot of CEOs or high-level C-level people, they talk about scalability very fast, and that's also the talking into the hierarchy and so on. So
yeah, but
it's an issue too.
Yeah, one thing about scalability, what they talk from the perspective of scale from above, but if you let the freedom loose, it goes much quicker. So like this company that I'm talking about, and it's coming up on Lisa's podcast soon. With an interview with the CEO, and she is a really brave woman. She actually took away the management team because she saw that they did more harm than good, and not because of what they did, because of the rumors about them were so not good. So they and she sort of spent 2 years now of not being in the way, taking away obstacles from change processes, and the change processes starts out there in the teams.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Henry, you've got a question too.
Yeah, Karin, tell us more about the magic. How in 3 sessions did you turn around this dysfunctional leadership team?
Yeah, so that's very easy to say in theory, and it's not so easy to conduct that, because you have to relate to the people as capable and control your own sort of urge to bring stuff, to come with solutions and tips and stuff like that. So when you conduct a session or like that, you have to be in a certain way so that the problem is with the people. That's one thing. And then it's just, what happens is that people are stuck in a mindset or an attitude. They could be resigned or hostile or something. And then you sort of have conversations so they get a choice and can see a benefit of changing attitudes collectively. But to do that, you have to also resolve the stuff that's really hard to talk about. And that's where the moose heads comes in, of course. So you have to talk about what you didn't talk about, and name the names that you didn't say something about. And why it goes so quickly is because we take all the surface issue out of the conversations for the moment. We can talk about them later. But then you have so much time to talk about the ungraspable and move it forward. So that saves a lot of time also. So it's, I mean, if I would state the whole process, in theory, it's not rocket science or complicated, but it's a whole other notion to do it and be with the weather, because it could be really rough, and and my trainers spent time to be with those weathers, where your urge is to run away from there because it's horrible sometimes. The silence could be horrible as well as full-blown war.
Thank you.
People in the chat, a couple were asking about what is a moose head, and so I was answering
that. The moose head is an elephant in the room. When we started with this work long ago, that saying wasn't imported from the States or from the Anglican world yet. So we didn't have that, but we have heard about elephants in rooms and thought it was a very good metaphor to use. But in our version, it became a moose head. And we found that the metaphor is that a group sits on around the table and they talk about the budget for next year, for instance, or the plans. And their conversation is as efficient as if it would be a big moose heads on the table that nobody talked about. And the moose heads, of course, represents a lot of subjects that you can't talk about, that is touchy and sensitive, like if you lost confidence in the manager, or if somebody behaves in a very strange way and nobody dares to say something about it, or we or them dynamic, or so stuff that is under the surface that is hard to talk about.
I can see that, Dima, you've put your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was curious to ask your perspective on the fact that if we look at research, it seems that there has been around for a while self-managing teams. Yeah. And it's sort of a documented phenomena. So do you think that this is something that's truly new, or do you think that it's just sort of bringing the old stuff to a further degree? So how is this different from organizations that are using self-managing teams, let's say?
I don't think the principles are new. I just think they're rarely used. And I'm not I don't know so much about that, but I know that before the industrialization, there were organizations that were much more self-organized, like in farms and stuff, and also in mines here in Sweden, it seems like. So it's just, and what I find is that those principles are so human and natural to us that they're easy to grasp. There is sort of common sense, and that's what people say. There is a company in Sweden called Björn Lundén where they worked like this for 30 years, and they are 115 people, and those people, they've never seen something else. Some of them, they've never been on an other sort of workplace, sort of, and they say, what should you do if you do it like this? This is the obvious natural way. So I don't know, I don't have an answer, but I think the principles are ancient.
Yeah, I think Joost from Corporate Rebels has written an article about how self-managing organizations or self-managing teams are nothing new, that I think going back 100 years even, there's references to it and stuff, but I agree with you that it's rare. And it's so interesting if you think about that. You were inspired, Karin, by Ricardo Semler and Semco in the 80s. I know, Henry, you were as well. And yet, here we are, 2020, and it seems like little by little there's more of an appetite for these things, but it's funny that these ideas haven't taken off.
No, and that they are so controversial, not so much maybe today, but still in some context, it's like dynamite. It's like you're talking about something really threatening. I spoke about this long ago, and I stopped because it was no fun. I was just ridicule, and what she's talking about is crazy woman. So it's like a threat also, of course.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting, and I think this is again why we wanted to write our book, is that that there is the shadow side now. There are lots of books out there, Reinventing Organizations and Brave New Work and Holacracy. And I think a shadow side of that is that now people have a jargon and a language. And I think we partly wanted to uncomplicate some of this, that you can also just start to have different kinds of dialogues. You don't need to learn a complicated system necessarily to start moving in this direction.
No, it's very important that every organization find their way and their pace and their way of doing it.
Yes, I can see there's a question in the chat here from Michaela. What are your top 3 reasons for why self-managing organizations are so rare? And thank you for being here. Humanocracy, by the way, is another great book that I recommend everyone read.
Yeah. Why they are rare? I don't know. That's what I've been struggling with so long. Why, since the upsides are so good. I remember I went to a board of directors in a bank and talked about this and the upsides, and they said, "Oh, it's really interesting." But then when I said what it would take, they said, "This is nothing for us." So I guess it's too challenging. That's why it's rare and too unfamiliar.
Esko, you've got a question there as well.
Hi, yeah. So I think probably this crowd is philosophically aligned to the idea of self-management, and maybe we've even all had some bad experience in some command and control hierarchical situation. But do we have evidence that this way of doing business is objectively gives better results and performance? Like, we want this, but why should people who are happy in those other systems give time for these ideas?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't see it as either or. That's or the right or wrong. That's one thing. From my first cases, I could clearly see the economical and financial results. Like, it was so connected, and in this big organization that we work with now, they also see results like that. And I think research will sort of, but it's so complex and so many components in it, so you can't really tell what's what from the source of result. You can definitely measure decrease in sick leave, in staff turnover, very quickly, I would say. So I don't think. I think we shouldn't debate on what's right. We should go to our organizations and see what works for us. Could we empower people more? Could we give them more freedom to act and listen to our customers or whatever, and take what you want and skip the rest, sort of thing. So it's not so dramatic.
Yeah, I think this has been a learning point for me, that it's not either or. That on the one hand, I think it's going to be a long time before hierarchical, bureaucratic organizations disappear, if they ever do. And I'm interested also now in the idea of ambidextrous organizations, and I've seen some examples of where that can really work. Of course, it's difficult, and there are situations where it doesn't work as well, because you can end up with this us versus them thing. But I think, again, for me, it comes back to this thing of like avoiding jargon and, let's be self-managed or teal or whatever, and more thinking about, what gets in the way for us to do our best work, and what gets in the way for people to tap into, their full potential and really make a difference. And how can we start to create the opportunities for people to do that, and have more autonomy and have more responsibility and ownership, and then everything follows from that, I think.
Yeah. One way of putting it is, in all those processes that I experienced, everything that doesn't work in an organization where they are from the start will float up to the surface. That could be people that don't work, it could be structures, it could be everything that doesn't work will be visible in a new way. And that's the benefit of it. And then you can do something about it.
I'm just thinking out loud that I had originally planned to put people in breakout rooms and to talk about things, but there's so many questions popping. But I think it would be good actually to process and talk to each other. Henry's nodding at me furiously. So let's try this. And as I said, Zoom has been glitching lately, so we'll have to see what happens when I do this now. So if you get stuck or you end up alone in a room or something like that, you can put your hand up in the breakout room, or you can come back to the main room and I can help you. But let's see, if we give you sort of like 6 minutes, you're in 2s and 3s, and you can talk to each other about what's coming up for you in hearing what we've been sharing so far. What questions are emerging for you? Any skepticisms? Any yeah buts? What ifs? How can yous? So yeah, what's top of mind for you? So I'll open the breakout rooms and give you 6 minutes, and then we'll come back and see what's come up. So enjoy. I had a bit of a panic because a few people came back because their rooms were empty, and I thought it might have been the Zoom gremlins, but I'm assuming the rest of you managed to have conversations and it wasn't a Zoom-wide glitch, but just a couple of people. So
that's fine.
Would anyone like to share a question or a highlight of what you talked about in your breakout rooms? If you just put up your hand, or, oh yeah, go ahead, Michael.
No, one thing that came up in our conversations was the importance of wholeness, that you can show up as your entire self. Otherwise, it might be even hard to identify what the elephant in the room is, because you don't realize that you can actually talk about, maybe I want to pray in the office, but maybe that's not allowed to talk about, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's also like people feeling like they can disagree or have a divergent opinion, or, you know, so often we rush to consensus in decision making, for example, but really delighting in divergence, and that, yes, someone disagrees or someone's dissatisfied with something, let's hear about that. Like, that's also really helpful rather than being compliant.
Yeah, and speaking about wholeness, I also really understood a lot in the last cases that we did, because the first ones were really easy in the sense that people were really passionate about what they were working with. They were really in the right place, in the right company. But in the latter cases, that was not the case. People have ended up in a work or in a profession that they really didn't approve of. They just ended up there. And to work like this, that's a really important factor, much more than traditional work, where you can sort of cope with not being so fulfilled, or you can just do some tedious, boring work that you are not created for, sort of. And that was the same with working with unemployed people, whereas in the 80s, it was quite controversial to ask people what they really wanted to work with, because they said, work should be horrible, and why should you get money for it? So that concept of doing what you like to do wasn't that common back then. And that was a very important factor to have it work when you work like in a self-managed way. You have to look that people are in the right place, sort of.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts, protests?
I often wonder how you would know there's a better way if you've never seen it.
Please elaborate. Can you say something more about that? Like, so you don't know that there is another way of working, you mean?
If you've only worked in places that have the same structure and the limitations and don't allow you to think,
yeah,
they don't want your input, they just want your hands,
yeah,
then you've never seen anything different, so how would you know?
Yeah, exactly. So you didn't reflect on also so much maybe what you wanted to do, but what I experienced, what unfolded when we installed this way of working, that people became more aware, and they much got aware about being in the wrong place, not because of the workplace. The workplace improved very much, but the actual task, people started to reflect on, should I do this the rest of my working life, or should I do something that is more in line with what I want? Yeah.
Yeah, Klaus.
Well, just to comment on that, so what John is saying, I think when you start talking, especially in a team, about the moosehead or the elephant in the room, then people start to talk about all the things they don't say or fearful to say, and that can start to change to something we don't know what it is, depending on what's going on in the culture of that organization or that team. So there's always, when you start to say things you never do or would really love to do but don't dare to, and then one thing will lead into another.
Yeah. So what you're saying, you can't control what's the process, which is one of the things also. But I will also state that there's not like you can say, you have to have like communication rules to be respectful, for instance, and talk constructively, or not like in a really, not like Trump yesterday, like in a good tone, and also you don't want to get stuck in what we call in Swedish ältande, just talk and talk and talk forever and get stuck. So that's part of the facilitation, to know when talk is needed to be complete, or when to sort of ask questions to move things to more constructive. So there's a whole set of ways to conduct such a dialogue, group dialogue also. But you have to be with that you don't know where it's heading. That's and to be with that fear.
Love to hear from new voices that we haven't heard from yet. Some other comments or questions, maybe from some of my fellow women.
Nuria raised her hand, and Ingun.
Thank you. I didn't see that. I don't know which of you was first, so fight to the death. Ingun, I can see you first. Maybe if you go.
Yeah, I think that it's really great what you're saying about not implementing an enormous structure, but actually starting with the companies or the organizations where they are and starting a dialogue and try to sort of adapt. Because I think maybe that's what's been stopping me reading Reinventing Organizations and thinking there's no way that I can come with this to my customers or to people I work with, because this is just too complex, and how would you do that? But there is a lot of curiosity around more self-management and more dialogue. So I think I just wanted to share that, but I think that makes it easier to start and makes it more possible for us to actually start a transformation that isn't overambitious somehow. So that's my thought.
Thank you.
I think companies. So we think companies are like very rigid, and they are. But actually, when we give them permission to express themselves, to speak up, and we make an inclusion of all the voices, then we can see what is the potential of that. So I think at the moment when we focus only on the view of the management, we may be very scared to do something big. But I think when we are able to bring all of their perspectives, and not all of them will agree, on how to evolve the organization. And this can bring, for instance, when it can bring self-management teams, but we can define how we move all together with defining a purpose of the full organization that people are aligned with, and what are our values. And then we define all the practices according to these values that and define how we make decision making. I think we are at the moment that this big transformation is not done by the decision of one person or 2 or 3 persons. The executive management is not done like that. It's a lot of transformation, but we need the collective to participate all of that. And when that is possible, then the change is happening fast. And I think COVID is one of these examples that nobody thought. For instance, in Spain, and I think, Lisa, you're in Barcelona, I'm from Spain, and we were fighting for many years to have the possibility to work from home. And companies didn't allow us. They were not trusting us. It was impossible. Please, Fridays, I would like to be at home. There was not a way. And now everyone has been forced to work at home. So this is how is that possible? At the end, it's not even a manager who decided that. It was something else that has decided that. So when I think so, the key point for me is that now there is not this freedom in organizations to express and to express the needs or the problems or the difficulties. When we can bring that block out, we can move a lot forward.
Yeah, some organizations report that they can see being more productive, working like this, that also during the pandemic. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think sometimes crises produce interesting insights. Like I think about the company Yash Paka in India, which I featured on my podcast. And there's a beautiful story there of this factory where they make compostable tableware and paper. And I think like 20 years ago or so, there was intercommunal violence in their village. And some of the managers who tended to live outside the village in the town couldn't get to the factory for several weeks. And when they came back to the factory, they discovered to their surprise that the factory workers had continued working. And not only that, but they had record production numbers. And rather than, write it off as a fluke or, be threatened by it, it prompted a discussion about, well, what do managers actually do then? Maybe some of the things we're doing is not so essential, and where can we add value instead of assuming that people need to be supervised or they need this and that.
Yeah. And also when people ask where to start, you all have so much experience already, and it's to start where you are really. And I don't talk so much to you as to maybe your clients or people that are more stuck in hierarchies, to start with your own team and behave and put the responsibility where it should be, in the middle of the table and stuff like that, like small steps, and see what happens. That's what we say to a manager in a big organization, but work with your team like this and then see what happens, because it's more about the mindset than the structures.
Joachim.
Yeah, what me and Catalina talked about was how practical it's practical knowledge and you need to practice with this all the time, and that leadership is something that how you are and what you do in practice. And what always surprises me when I'm with organizations is that they do online training in leadership, but that's just a pack of sort of a deck of PowerPoint slides. So it's always the theory that comes out, and I think that's where you are different, that it's so practical in nature. Why do you think that is? That it's always the theory that pops up?
I think, I don't know, but leadership is so hard to capture, and so many interpretations and so many notions, and mingled with management and other stuff. So it's hard to know what it is, sort of.
Yeah, but we have no problem putting it on paper.
No.
Ingun.
We can talk about it a lot for ages.
I have a question. It's a big one, but you say you start with your own team, but what if this is a manager way down in the organization trying to transform her team, and there is a top manager that is very hierarchical and against it?
Yeah, don't have a quick fix, but the overall general thing is to try to talk about it. And if managers are in the way, my favorite trick is to ask that manager, okay, I would like to talk to you about my conditions, my prerequisites, if you're under that manager. I guess you as my manager are in charge of my prerequisites. Is that right? And then these managers probably say yes, because there's no other answer to answer. And then you say, okay, good, because I want to have a talk about my prerequisites, because I can see I'm limited by them. Could we talk about that? Because I really want to do a good job and produce results here, but I can see my conditions here are not good, and you are in power of them. So can we talk about how we can alter them? So that's kind of conversations. That sounds easy, but I don't know any other way than talk and communicate about what's not working.
Martina, you've got a question, I can see.
Yeah, it's not so much a question. I'd just like to react to what Joachim said a couple of minutes before. So from my point of view, I noticed as a trainer who executes leadership trainings, for example, it feels not so comfortable to invite leaders to reflect themselves and to question their own beliefs and their own way of being, and often, in my experience, they want, how can I do it with my team? What kind of tools? What kind of practices can I use? But don't don't touch my own really core mindset or something like that. And your book, Karin and Lisa, empowered or gave me now more courage again to do it more and more, and be more brave to do it, or braver than I did it in the past.
Yeah, I can very much relate to that. And in the beginning, when we trained manager, they were really upset with us many times. And then we find a way to sort of address what needs to be addressed. And a lot of that is their self-interest. What's in it for them to look at their self and reflect. And we sort of missed that point from the beginning. And also made strong contracts with them to be straight with them. And but the core thing which has to be there is what's in it for them. And it needs to be a strong self-interest to be able to do good training, or like training that makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think also I'm often talking to people in organizations that are, trying to move towards self-management, and frustrated with some people who are resisting or pushing against it, or still stuck in their old ways, whether it's managers not letting go, or employees not stepping in or stepping up. And I think that being compassionate and allowing people the space that it takes, we're talking about, for many people, decades of conditioning and being socialized in this way, and it takes time to unlearn those habits, and it's painful to confront your pitfalls, and that's okay. And I think creating the space for that's important. And I know, Karin, when you were working in these companies, you spent a lot of time listening to people so that they felt heard, and sometimes that listening even is transformative.
Yeah. And I mean, there will be a big shift if this continues, this movement continues the way I wish it will. Then a lot of manager has to face a lot of challenging stuff, and many will realize it's no fun anymore because I'm not so interested in people and this. I'm interested in totally different things. And then they have to find their roles because they contribute with their knowledge and their drive. And of course, that's also needed. But I think it will be quite a painful time for both managers and employees to shift. And I think the time we are living in will force that movement.
Yeah, I think so. Well, on that note of kind of looking to the future, we're up to the end of our hour. So I just want to say again, a huge thank you for all of you for joining us and for your thoughtful questions. And we're just so happy that you are curious about these ideas and on journeys of your own. I'll share some resources after this in an email, but if you have any other questions or you want to chat about any of this stuff, then feel free to reach out. Where's the champagne? I know if we were in person, we could have champagne and a party. So we'll just have to cheers an invisible cup to each other. But thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Prost.
Thank you. See you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Bye.